Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion on sales categories and related topics in Design Manager. My name is Brad, and I'll be hosting a demonstration today. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. Lastly, if you missed a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, you can go to our Help Center at knowledge.designmanager.com. Select the Webinars menu and go to Recorded Webinars, and you can view our current and past topics. You can also go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Incorporated or Design Manager INC, and you can review all of our past webinars and tutorials at your leisure. In this webinar, we'll be discussing several interrelated concepts that ultimately contribute to how you can configure Design Manager to properly record your revenue and cost of goods sold for the various goods and services you purchase from your vendors and sell to your clients. Primarily, we'll be focusing on topics of component types, company default accounts, and sales categories. As these concepts are nearly identical in both Design Manager Cloud and Design Manager Professional Cloud, we'll be using Design Manager Cloud for the majority of the discussion to reduce the distraction of switching between the platforms, though I will show how to access a few functions in the Design Manager Professional Cloud platform, of course. If you have a question specific to the Pro Cloud platform, don't hesitate to type it into the questions pane or email it to support@designmanager.com. Lastly, the topics we'll be covering ultimately can affect how accounting activity is recorded on our financial statements, particularly the income statement or profit and loss. Therefore, you should always consult your accounting professional and, if need be, Design Manager technical support prior to implementing any alterations. If you're unsure of the consequences of making these changes, be sure to contact your accounting professional and/or Design Manager technical support for a little assistance. Let's first discuss the concept of component types within Design Manager. Component types allow you to classify the goods and services that you purchase from your vendors. Design Manager comes configured with 6 various component types, and they're defined on the Company Advanced Options window General tab. To access, we go to File, Company Settings. On the Company Information window, click the Advanced button, and then jump over to the General tab, and we can see the 6 component types to which I'm referring. In the Professional platform, you get there very similarly. You go to File, Company Information and Settings, and then click our Advanced button, General here as well. Again, as you can see, the 2 platforms are very similar in these concepts. Now, notice, with our 6 component types, merchandise and time are disabled, or they cannot be changed, but the other 4 are fully customizable. Now, this is the settings that the Design Manager comes in with by default. And we have component types, besides merchandise and time, for freight, crating, installation and labor, and design fee. But again, you can customize these to match your business needs. Well, why would you do so? Well, any genre of good or service that you want to track separately can be its own component type. However, for purchases that have a different tax structure, each should definitely be a separate component type. For example, is a certain good or service taxed or not? Let's take a look at one of our sales tax codes to further illustrate this point. I'm going to go to my glossaries, sales tax codes, and let's look at our example for Pennsylvania sales tax. Now notice, in my example of Pennsylvania, everything but design fee and design time are taxable at 6%. So I would certainly want to have separate component types for those 2 services so that they don't get taxed inappropriately. Besides the fact of whether or not something is taxed at all, they may be taxed at different rates. For instance, in New York City, merchandise is taxed at one rate, while design fee services are taxed at another. Again, we would need a separate component type to distinguish between that merchandise and design fee service. Another example that we've come across in our experience is that in several areas around the country, the concepts of delivery or shipping versus freight are considered different services. And in many areas, they're subject to different tax rates, or whether or not one is taxable and one is not. We reviewed this concept in detail in our webinar, Setting Up Sales Tax Codes, which again, you can see on our YouTube channel and review all of that information at your leisure. Other properties of component types. Well, in your business model, you may not have any need for crating, for example, and you want to separate installation and labor rather than having it as one joint component type. Well, you can make installation its own component type and labor a separate one as well. And notice, as soon as I change my screen title, Design Manager is automatically updating that throughout the software. So it really is an instantaneous process. Maybe you just want to use a different term from freight. You might want to use shipping rather than freight to have it shown throughout Design Manager. You could do that as well. Another reason you might want to change your component types. Further, many settings in Design Manager can be customized by component type. For instance, you can price them differently. So I'm marking up my merchandise at 30%, but my freight or shipping is being marked up at 10%. I could decide whether or not I want a particular component type to be included in my deposit calculation to my client. And even on some of our documents, such as our proposal, we could have our shipping or freight be totaled at the bottom, listed for each of the particular items, or combined into the price as well. So component types really offer a high degree of customization in Design Manager for the various types of goods and services that you're providing your client. Okay, component types. You can also use component types to allow you to focus solely on a particular component type for analysis or finding other information out in Design Manager. If we look at our reports, for example, Design Manager comes configured with a report under our Project Management folder, and we call it our Freight Analysis, but it's really a component type analysis. And as of many of you who may have joined our webinars in the past, once I find a report that I find particularly useful, I select it on my report tree, I click my Add to Favorites button, and that puts it on my favorite reports tree, so I can access them quickly. And you can see I have a couple here already that we'll review as the webinar progresses. So if we look at our component analysis, I could say I want to focus on installation and labor, perhaps, and see all of my costs from my vendor versus my price to the client for just those particular components of the installation component type. And if we run that report, we can see I'm analyzing that particular component type. So here is the estimated cost of my installation and labor and my price to the client for my master bedroom window treatment. And if we look at another project for the Hilsons, we can see just the installation and labor cost and prices for our chandelier and chair. So component types allow us to focus just on very individual specifications in Design Manager. And speaking of specifications, another component type use would be on our specification search window. I might want to see or focus on all of my installation or labor components throughout the entire Design Manager. So my specification search window, I can go down to my component type selection and look at all of my installation and labor components simply by clicking Find. And there they are. And notice the type is installation and labor for all of them. For those professional users, if you are unfamiliar with the specification search window, it's accessed off of your project specifications window, and you can see your spec search window button at the bottom. And the window is very similar with the two platforms. So Component types can be used to classify the components for tax and pricing differences, for analysis, easy identification, etc. But most important to our discussion, however, is that the component type is the first determination of what revenue and cost of goods sold accounts are ultimately used upon invoicing our client and receiving our bills from the vendors, respectively. Let's see how this works. This is going to take us back to our company information window. And on our company information window, we have a tab for sales accounts. These are the accounts that are used for each component type when we don't override the accounts further down the design process, as we'll discuss shortly. Each component type has its own account in our example and is representative of how Design Manager is initially configured. So we can see that by default, anything that we categorize as merchandise will go into our 41,900 furniture revenue account. All freight will go into the 49,000 freight revenue account, crating, installation labor, etc. So these are our default revenue accounts for each of our component types. Our cost of goods sold, or COGS accounts, has very similar array of accounts for each of our component types: merchandise, freight, crating, etc. Now, we could have had, for instance, perhaps our design fee revenue account and our time revenue account go to the same physical general ledger account, so they would appear that way on the income statement, but we still want them separated conceptually at the component level for tax differences or other reasons that we just discussed. So you have the ability to separate goods and services via the component type, but you could include their accounting activity into a singular account if desired. If I wanted to change my time account, for example, to be the same as the design fee, all you have to do is type in the account number. Notice it automatically updates, or of course you could use your search button as well. We'll keep that back at our professional services and time for our examples. And again, all of that is applicable to our cost of goods sold accounts as well. So these are our default revenue or sales and cost of goods sold accounts when we're not, quote unquote, overriding the accounts down in our specifications. Let's go, which brings us to our next point of the concept of sales categories in Design Manager. And sales categories are an extremely important concept in the software. They allow us to classify the goods and services when we're selling to our clients at the item level, and can be used to answer questions such as, how much profit did I make on furniture this year, or what was my total cost on artwork for the Smith project? Design Manager comes pre-configured with a set of sales categories, but you can fully customize them to mirror your particular business model. To access your sales categories in Design Manager Cloud, simply click your glossaries and go down to Sales Categories, and there they are. And for our Pro Cloud users, you would go under your Accounting and go out to your Sales Categories under Lists and Glossaries on that tab, and there they are. Again, very similar in concept in both of the platforms. Now, sales categories are used frequently throughout Design Manager as a way to filter or group certain items. Very commonly, for example, if we look back at our reports, another very common report under project management is our profit analysis report, which again, I've added to my favorites. And I might want to focus on all of the items in Design Manager that are furniture, for example, so I could analyze my cost, pricing, and ultimate profitability. And notice I could use a range to filter for sales category, and I can also use the format selection to sort or group by sales category. A very common theme throughout Design Manager is using the sales category to gain the information that you desire by either filtering or grouping. And if we run the report, we can see Here's our sales category of furniture, and these are the items for this particular project of the furniture sales category. So I can focus very specifically on how our cost, pricing, and ultimate profitability is for just our furniture. And I could likewise do so for any of the component types. Now, besides these sort of standard uses of our sales categories, we can use the sales categories to override the company's sales and cost of goods sold accounts for an individual item, as I discussed previously. Let's see how we do that. Notice, on our sales category glossary, let's look at our sales category for artwork. If we edit that, we can see, very similar to our company window, that we have an array of sales or revenue and cost of goods sold accounts associated with that sales category. So anytime that I use the merchandise component type, I'll be using the 41300 artwork revenue or sales account upon invoicing the client. And likewise, when the bills come from the vendor, I'll use the 51300 artwork cost of goods sold account, rather than using our furniture default revenue account for merchandise. For my other types, freight, crating, etc., I've selected to use the company default. I want the sales category just to be concerned with my merchandise component type, but for all of the others, I want to look back at the company window and use that type. A convenient feature here is if I ever change my, let's say, freight account at the company level, the sales category will automatically pick up that change. So I don't need to edit each one of these sales categories individually. A very handy feature if there is an ultimate account change at the company level. Now, different sales categories can also relate to the same revenue and cost of goods sold accounts. For example, I might have separate sales categories for couches, chairs, dining tables, etc., rather than a singular furniture sales category. But all of them could certainly use the same 41900 furniture revenue account and the 51900 furniture cost of goods sold account. So I could have the activity go into two single accounts on my income statement, but still have the ability to run reports or do various analysis of the subcategories of furniture that's important to myself as a business owner. Adding a sales category is very easy. Let's say I want a separate sales category for, I don't know, perhaps custom pillows, rather than just having them use an existing sales category such as accessory. So to create a sales category, just click the Add button, put in a character code, a category code. Let's use PILLO. Name. Pillows seems pretty easy for us to identify. And then we want to select which accounts we want to use on our income statement for our pillow sales category. Well, for everything but merchandise, let's go ahead and use the company default. And simply by selecting that option, Design Manager goes out, looks at our company information window, and populates the sales and COGS accounts for us based upon our default sales and default cost of goods sold tabs. And the same for all of the others. Now for my merchandise account, I could, for instance, perhaps use my accessories revenue account if I wanted all of my pillow sales to go right into that accessory account and not have it further broken out on my income statement. But if I did, I could perhaps even create a new account. Revenue accounts are generally in our 40,000 range, so if I wanted to add a new one, I could click the Add button on my account search or account glossary window. Let's use about 41110, and we'll call that account pillows, and we'll set the account type to revenue. Click OK. I've created a brand new revenue account, And now I could use that to record the sale to my clients for all my pillows. We can do the exact same thing for our cost of goods sold account. Click on our search button. We'll click add on our account search. I like to use a very similar pair of account numbers in our cost of goods sold. Those are usually in the 50,000 range according to our general accepted accounting rules. And this would be pillows as well, but our account type would be cost of goods sold. And there we go. So now I've created a new sales category for our custom pillows, and I've made new accounts in my revenue of our 41110 pillow revenue account, and a corresponding account for our cost of goods sold for pillows as well. Click OK, and there we go, brand new sales category. So you can have as many or as few sales categories as is necessary for the proper accounting and analytics that your business model requires. Again, if these concepts are a little bit out of your comfort zone, be sure to contact your accounting professional and or design manager technical support if you have any questions. So, how do all these concepts relate? Let's take a look at our current income statement, which ultimately is our goal with all of these various component types and sales categories and our company default accounts. So let's go to our report. Your income statement, also known as your profit and loss, is under your general ledger folder, under your financial statements, and then you even have a subfolder for income statements. And you can run the income statement in a variety of manners, monthly, quarterly, yearly, or even a comparative range if you wanted to see how well you did in quarter one of last year versus quarter one of this year. We'll focus on the monthly income statement, which again I've added to my favorite reports as we'll access it a few times in our final discussion here. I'm going to run our income statement for a current month. Usually, I like to have my zero balance account suppressed. I don't want to see an account on there if it has no activity to keep my income statement nice and tidy. But for our discussion today, I'm going to say, hey, show all of my accounts, please, regardless if they have activity or not. If we click OK, we can see our income statement. And the income statement is considering three types of accounts: our sales or revenue, our cost of goods sold, and finally, our operating expenses. And this will provide us with our net income in the given fiscal month and year to date. We're focusing right now on our current fiscal month, and notice in our sales accounts we have no activity, no sales yet for the current month. For our professional users, very simple. Under your accounting tab, you go right to your general ledger frame, click your financial statements button, and you can get right to your financial statements and to your income statements. And again, for our pro users, if you want to add anything to your report favorites, you can do so as well, simply by highlighting it on the reports tree, clicking your add to favorites, and it'll go right onto your favorites menu. Now, let's go ahead and get some income recorded. So go back to our project and specifications, and I've configured our Carter's Pennington home with two items for examples. In our guest bedroom 1, I have some artwork. And in this case, I'm not using a sales category. The sales category is blank. And further, on our component window is where we select our component type. And we're using merchandise in this example. And we have a total price to the client of $1,300. Now, guest bedroom 2 also has some artwork. But in this case, we're using the sales category of artwork. Again, on our component window, we have it set for merchandise, and this artwork is going to cost the client $780. Now, in Design Manager, revenue is accrued or generated when we make a client invoice. So if we go to our documents in accounting, for the Carters, we can make a client invoice. And here's our new invoice window. Today's date is just fine. Transaction description, sales category, example. And let's sort by reference number. And there we can see our artwork for guest bedroom 2 and guest bedroom 1. Go ahead and create our invoice by clicking OK. We have my preferred format of the modern or contemporary. And there it is. Our sample artworks for both guest bedroom 1 and guest bedroom 2. If we close and accept our invoice, now let's take a look at our income statement. Back to our reports, favorites, income statement. Notice we now have some revenue being realized. We have $780 in our artwork. Well, that makes sense. But we also have $1,300 in our furniture. Remember, on our guest bedroom 1, our artwork did not use a sales category. So in that case, Design Manager looks back at our company information, sales accounts, and uses the default merchandise account for revenue. In this case is the 41,900 furniture sales account. And because our component type is merchandise, that is where our $1,300 of sales went. But item 31 in guest bedroom 2 did use the artwork sales category, so it should appropriately put its revenue in our 41,300 artwork sales account, which we can see our $780 is listed right there. So those concepts of company default accounts, sales category, and component types all ultimately determine where our revenue is being displayed on our income statement. Well, the same thing works with our cost of goods sold. If we look at our cost of goods sold, we can see we don't have any cost of goods sold for the current month either. Now, for cost of goods sold to be accrued, that occurs when we make our vendor invoice. Technically, it goes into work in process first until it's invoiced to the client, but that's a discussion for another day. For our example today, let's go ahead and make a vendor invoice against one of our purchase orders. How about our purchase order for Legacy Antiques? Let's imagine that the bill came in. If we go ahead and click our vendor invoice button, there's our artwork for guest bedroom 1 and guest bedroom 2. Invoice number, sales category example. Today's date is just fine. Transaction description, optional but highly recommended as it provides us a description of what we may have been doing months or years prior when we're recording our activity. Once everything matches the bill from Legacy Antiques in my hand perfectly, I can go ahead and say I'm happy with this vendor invoice and click OK. Now, if we look back at our income statement, we can see that our cost for the artwork of guest bedroom 1 went into our furniture cost of goods sold account. Again, since there was no sales category on our artwork for guest bedroom 1, the cost goes into our default merchandise account of the furniture 51,900. But guest bedroom 2 did use the artwork sales category, so that is the cost of goods sold account to which the cost of the artwork for guest bedroom 2 is recorded. Now, we frequently receive questions as to why revenue or cost of goods sold accounts don't have the expected activity associated with them. And it's commonly due to the associated sales category or the absence of sales categories on the item. So it's very important to review your sales categories for accuracy so we know what activity should be going into our various sales and cost of goods sold accounts. The easiest way to review your sales categories is on our report window. Under glossary listings, you can see our sales categories. We can print this report, and very easily we can see all of our sales categories with the code and name, and then the various accounts associated with each of the component types. So we can see for the vast majority of our non-merchandise component types, creating, installation, labor, etc., we're using the company defaults. The merchandise for most of our sales categories has its own revenue account, 41,100 for accessories, 41,200 for antiques, etc., and corresponding cost of goods sold accounts. So we have pairs of revenue and COGS accounts for each of our sales categories. I use freight here as an example. That's somewhat different in the concept of the sales category. I may have to make an item just for freight for a variety of shipping charges that I may have accrued from my vendors. And in this case, whenever I use the freight sales category, I don't care what component type I use, merchandise, crating, installation, etc. I always want to use the freight cost of goods sold and freight revenue accounts. So I'm totally overriding what accounts may be selected, except for the unusual circumstance of design time, of course. Usually, we want to be using revenue for our sales and cost of goods sold accounts for all of our component types. I do, however, have an example of our reimbursable expenses. In this case, I'm also using a reimbursable expense cost of goods sold and revenue account, but I've commonly seen this configured where there's an expense account as the cost of goods sold account. The accounting professional wants that in the expenses area on our income statement. So for those reimbursable expenses, they wouldn't appear in the cost of goods sold for the cost, they would appear in the operating expenses. So I have seen circumstances where this is a $60,000 expense account. But again, if that concept is unfamiliar, be sure to confer with your accounting professional before doing so. Most importantly here though, these accounts associated with our sales categories should never be any of the accounts on our other accounts on our company information window. These are special accounts to hold activities such as our accounts receivable, client deposits, vendor deposits, etc. So if you see a sales category using one of those accounts, you're probably going to have a very difficult time with your income statement. Even a more sweeping statement. If we look at our accounts, basically any of what we call our balance sheet accounts should not be used in our sales category. Balance sheet accounts are generally our first three types, as indicated by the 10,000 assets, things such as our cash accounts, money markets, accounts receivable, etc. Our 20,000 liabilities, accounts payable, any credit cards, sales tax, etc. And finally, our 30,000 equity accounts, retained earnings, owner's draws, suspense. It would be very unusual to have any of these accounts associated with the sales category as well. Primarily, we want to stick to our 40,000 revenue and 50,000 cost of goods sold accounts. Another thought when it comes to accurate accounting with our sales categories, etc., Design Manager can be configured to force the user to enter a sales category. So back at our specifications, remember, our artwork for guest bedroom 1 did not have a sales category. The user simply neglected to input one. There's a setting, however, on our company information window, back to our advanced, general tab, that says require sales category. This enforces that the user must enter a sales category upon entering or editing a specification. So if we look back at our artwork for guest bedroom 1, I'm now forced to enter a sales category. Now, Design Manager cannot tell what the sales category should be, just that one needs to be entered, just like that. And again, very similar professional. That will be done under File, Company Information, Advanced, General, Require Sales Category. That is my preferred method of configuring the company to ensure that the user is at least recognizing that they should enter a sales category, classifying the good or service that they're providing to the client. Okay, now today we discussed several important concepts in Design Manager pertaining on how we want the purchase and resale of goods and services to be reflected on our financials, including the component type to classify the purchase from the vendor on the component window, while the sales category further classifies the sale to the client on the item window. The combination of these, along with our company account defaults, determine how we affect our various revenue and cost of goods sold accounts, and ultimately how they appear on our income statement. And that brings us to our end of our discussion on sales categories, component types, and general ledger accounts. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Hope to see you in the future, and have a wonderful afternoon.